Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, June 15th, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a look at the battle for the White House and discussing the validity of certain polls and why certain states are being looked at in terms of polling data and discussing whether or not they're actually close. Yes, Donald Trump is underperforming his margin in 2016 in a number of Republican states. That'll be a video for another day. But the drastic margins and the drastic narrowing up of certain key Republican states don't necessarily make sense for the 2020 election. I'm sure some of you guys who are pretty active on election Twitter have seen this pretty infamous by now poll that shows Arkansas within striking distance for Joe Biden. In fact, Real Clear Politics has published this poll, which shows Donald Trump with a mere 2% lead over Joe Biden in 2020. 47% for Donald Trump, 45% for Joe Biden. Now, what's so crazy about this poll? It's just a poll, doesn't really mean much. But in 2016, Donald Trump won by 26.6%. All polling data indicated that he was going to win by roughly the same margin. And, the Talk Business Hendricks College poll, the same type of one that we're seeing here now. I think the star indicates that it might have been an insider poll. But it's the same pollster that showed Donald Trump with a pretty substantial lead. Unfortunately, this is not going to be close to the result in 2020. Even in 2012, a year with, the first African-American president on the ballot, Arkansas has a very large black population. Joe Biden, not Joe Biden, well, Joe Biden was on the ticket here, but Barack Obama didn't even come close to winning it. He got 36.9% of the vote in Arkansas. Let's go back to 2008. Hillary Clinton was running in 2008. She was polling ahead in Arkansas. Did that mean good news for Obama? It didn't. Obama polled within 10%, but ended up losing by 19.8% in the state. So, sure, the state might have gone for Clinton, 12 years before, or 8 years before, but no, not 8, 12 years. Yeah, 12 years before, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be competitive. It has only gotten further to the right, 19% in 2008. We were really 20%, 24% in 2012, 27% in 2016. And now all of a sudden, it's back down to Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump numbers in terms of, actually not Donald Trump, John McCain numbers. We're talking about the only time we've ever seen a poll that shows Arkansas close was 2008 when Hillary Clinton was running for the Democratic nomination, and she was by far a much more conservative person and did not have as much baggage on her as a political candidate. But now we're seeing this poll that shows Donald Trump barely ahead in Arkansas, not just here. In Missouri, a new poll shows Trump ahead by 4%, and the most recent one, just held within the last couple of days, show him ahead by only 8%. He won to the state of Missouri in 2016 by 18.5%. Not exactly supposed to be super close this election. In Utah, Trump won it by 18.1% as well, but Mitt Romney won it by nearly 50%, running up the margin, an even larger margin of victory than any single state in 2016. So Donald Trump, is leading by 3% in the most recent poll. Now, for these other polls, I wouldn't necessarily think this +5 margin makes sense, but I do expect Trump to win, probably around by 18, maybe larger than that because Evan McMullin is not running for president. If you look at the results then, Evan McMullin actually got 21% in Utah. Nobody had an overall majority. In 2012, you cannot say the same thing. Mitt Romney got 72.8% of the vote there. So, yes, Donald Trump drastically lessened in terms of the margin, but that was because of independent Evan McMullin, which got 21% of the vote, which was very close actually to Hillary Clinton's number in polling data and actually on election day. Within striking distance, if there was just a lot more backing away from Hillary Clinton in Utah. But when we take a look at this number one is very dangerous for our overall political climate. We really shouldn't be taking a look at polls outside of swing states and discussing whether or not they're actually supposed to be taken seriously. The reason why I'm addressing this video is because I've seen a number of people taking this poll, and whether they were supporting Joe Biden or supporting Donald Trump, either they had something very negative to say about it in terms of the Trump supporters. And I've seen a lot of Biden supporters take this and say, Donald Trump is narrowing down safe Republican states. But this is a BC rated pollster from 538. And though it did have mild accuracy in 2016, that's not to say that we should take this at all and take a look at it and address it as if it's just a regular swing state poll and that all of a sudden Biden should be targeting Arkansas and that Arkansas is now a number of other southern states that have been becoming more Democratic. Sure, they may possibly vote to the left of their 2016 margins, but that's not to say that they will be competitive. This is one of the key signs that this poll wasn't necessarily right. They disapprove of Tom Cotton as a United States Senator, and right now they disapprove of Donald Trump's job as president. That doesn't make sense. Donald Trump was, sure, disapproved of nationwide and has been having a lot of trouble in terms of his chances for his reelection bid. But that does not mean that all of a sudden these solid Republican states are going to be against him. Sure, they may narrow their approval down to 12%, or as we saw in some states like Kansas, within single digits, but at the end of the day, Donald Trump is going to carry those states on election day. And this is not to say that, again, Joe Biden should not be targeting any of the states that I mentioned. When we take a look at the party registration for this poll itself, we're not going to discuss age. We're not really going to discuss race, even though they did poll pretty mildly accurately in terms of race. But for party affiliation, this is what really, was surprising. Number one, 30.7% of Democrats. I could see that if they had polled more Republicans. Now, I understand that nationwide there are more registered Democrats than Republicans. So obviously this does adjust to the state of Arkansas itself. But you also have to keep in mind that a lot of the Democrats that are still registered in Arkansas and a lot of Democrats registered in the South are always voting Republican. For example, West Virginia, which has more registered Democrats, but by far elects more Republicans on the presidential level in terms of margins now. Their governor has flipped from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. They have a Republican senator. They have all 3 House of Representative members being Republicans. So when you take a look at states such as West Virginia, that pretty much applies to the rest of the South. A lot of these people just haven't changed their party registration. Sure, they vote in every election, and a lot of their views do reflect the average conservative that we see today, but that was the Democratic Party's ideology in the past. Even in 1992, Bill Clinton today would probably be not at all competitive in a Democratic primary just because of how conservative his policies were, or even someone as progressive or progressively viewed right now as Al Gore. A lot of these candidates in the past have had to take progressive stances. Remember in 2008 that the Obama campaign did not officially endorse or come out in support of gay marriage, which may seem like a very common thing for Democrats to do now. But around 12 years ago, it wasn't. So can you imagine 12 years before? And a lot of these Arkansas Democrats, not just here, I wouldn't say this necessarily applies to Utah, where this necessarily applies in other states, but definitely around the South. I would say that there's a number of Democrats, which I think is important to take a note of. And number one, when we take a look at the most recent 2014 Pew Research Center, and I can guarantee it, there are more registered Republicans now, but 46% say that they are Republican affiliated or lean Republican. 16% are saying they're around the middle, and 38% for the Democrats. So I definitely think that poll should have probably indicated that at least gone a little bit more in depth in terms of polling Republicans. In terms of that alone, I would also say completely negate the use of polls from Arkansas and some of these other states. Missouri actually moved down into the likely column in my recent election prediction, but that's because I do think that it is possible that we do return to the 2012 similar type numbers. I'm thinking maybe 12-13% for Joe Biden if he does outperform Hillary Clinton in this state. But if we take a look at polling data, it actually did indicate a Trump victory by around 11%. So while this does say Trump might win by 4-8%, he could possibly outperform it as he did by 9%, which could be enough to put it in the safe column, barely actually based off the average of these polls. But actually, no, it would be 14.5%. But it is possible that it does narrow down into the likely column based off of the overall election day result versus the polling averages. That wouldn't necessarily be enough to move over this polling average into the safe column, but I will say that Missouri is not in play. I don't think that Joe Biden should be targeting it. In 2008, it actually, for the first time in I think decades, voted against the presidential election winner. McCain won it by 0.1% on election day. Now, it's not at all competitive, and it really shouldn't be targeted as such. Same thing for Utah. I understand that Mitt Romney has said that he's not voting for Donald Trump. That does not mean he's explicitly voting for Joe Biden. He could write in his wife's name again. You never really know. But I will say that Mitt Romney's impact in Utah will be a lot larger than any other Republican that we've seen in Utah. Mitt Romney had the largest margin of victory, much larger than McCain's, and much larger than Donald Trump's in 2016. So, yes, Mitt Romney will have an influence on these voters, but not enough to flip a state like Utah and not enough to make it super competitive. In 2016, it was probably taken a little bit too seriously because Evan McMullen's impact was probably overestimated, which it was by polling data, but at one point in time, McMullen did lead overall in the statewide average. But on election day, he ended up coming in third, which isn't too bad for someone who ran a third-party race. But again, Utah was still a pretty solid victory for Donald Trump, 18.1% statewide. So taking a look at a lot of these polls and taking a look at the 538 ratings for some of these polls, sure, they may perform, at least the Hendricks College poll may be rated a little bit better than some polls like Remington Research and a couple of other areas, Harris X, Rasmussen Reports. So I understand that some people may be skeptical, but I will say that ignore the use of polls that are trying to pretty much either, number one, anger the Republican base, meaning trying to get them to turn out by showing states like this are closed and that the Republican votes are needed, or redirect attention away from the Democratic Party. A lot of these polls are put out there, number one, for their own use. If you take a look at the polls done in the Kansas Senate race, those are purposely put out there because, honestly, who really cares about the general election poll? I get it if Chris Kobach is the nominee, but there is no real purpose of doing it now before the primary is done. I understand there is speculation, but a lot of those polls done out there are to show that Kobach is the losing nominee, and it is working. In states such as Kansas, it's done all around the country. This is not something new. This is not new to 2020. If the establishment base does not want you to be the nominee, a lot of the times they will do an inside poll and poll the people that they want to answer and show you as a losing candidate against a potential Democrat or Republican, show you drastically ahead of someone else or drastically under someone else, so that either suppresses your voters or inspires the other supporters. For a case, if we take Donald Trump, for example, not many Republicans are full-fledged going out to the primary. They don't really care about the presidential primary because we all know who the nominee is going to be. But if there was some type of speculation where, let's say, Mike Pence, obviously this is not going to happen, but if Mike Pence wanted to run, they could go ahead and do a poll that shows Mike Pence neck and neck with Donald Trump. That would absolutely inspire the Trump base in order to come out. Trump would run numerous ads showing we're down in the polls, or the Mike Pence campaign might say we're close enough, come out and vote. But at the end of the day, a lot of that support would discussion would drive out Trump support, because you are pretty much showing a race that shouldn't be close as close. Same thing goes for the state of Kansas. I mean, it's a solid Republican state on the presidential level, should not really be competitive on the Senate level. That polls are done in order to show Roger Marshall as the winning Republican and Chris Kobach as the non-winning Republican. So the same thing is starting to happen here. I understand that polls could be wrong. In 2016, there were some polls that showed Hillary Clinton within a narrower distance, at one point leading in Missouri. Realistically, she never really cracked that 50% mark in any of these polls, I don't believe, or actually I think her highest might have been 42% in these polls. So again, not really a lot to look at there. When we take a look at the polls here, again, Joe Biden has cracked 42%, but still around 43, 44. So we should probably expect a Trump victory in Missouri and Utah and Arkansas, but these states are not going to be close. And I really think that, yes, you may like Joe Biden or you may not like Donald Trump, but not necessarily support Joe Biden. But spreading these polls is only really just pushing, I guess, a type of misinformation campaign, because these states themselves are not going to be this close. It's not going to be a 2% margin in Arkansas, and it's just not really going to benefit political discussion. So I was going to make a video about Donald Trump underperforming his margins in a number of key Republican states. I will say that the states narrowing down, maybe 8-9% could show some type of resemblance of a Republican push away from Donald Trump in 2020. That is possible. In 2008, we saw a drastic swing from Republican support in a number of states compared to John McCain's margins. So it is possible, but it's not to say that a state that Donald Trump won by 27% is all of a sudden within striking distance of the Biden campaign. That's not necessarily true. So again, thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. The poll is still open for the subscriber decided election night. You can choose who you want Joe Biden's vice presidential nominee, and you can also choose who you believe would win in each of all of the 50 states. I didn't include the District of Columbia. I apologize for that, but we all know how that one's going to go. And yeah, again, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all later today.